So it appears that you all have loved my top 15 enlisted tips and tricks. In this video, we will be doing another enlisted 15 tips and tricks for newer players and for veteran players alike. Of course, this video has been made possible through the friends at Discord, meaning if you haven't liked, subscribed, or joined the Discord, I highly suggest that you do. And if you found this 15 tips and tricks video to be engaging and very insightful, I suggest that you watch the previous 15 enlisted tips and tricks video. And if you want even more of that, well, just comment in the comment section down below for another enlisted 15 tips and tricks video, and you'll get that. As of right now, this is tips 15, or should I say 16 to 30. With that said, let's get started. For number 1 today, I highly suggest that you use the weapon of the same tier. Make sure that whatever weapon you use is to the same battle tiers, or should I say, all the weapons you should be using should be in the same battle tier. This is because you will be fighting players of weapons with weapons of this highest tier that you bring. Meaning, if you have a bunch of tier 1 weapons but you have a tier 5 weapon, you're going to be facing tier 5 weapons. If you have a bunch of tier 4 weapons and one tier 1 weapon, that means you're going to be fighting tier 4 weapons. As you can see, it is the highest tier that you have. That means the best suggestion for me to give all of you is to use weapons of the same tier. For example, if you want to fight in tier 2, bring all tier 2 weapons. If you want to fight in tier 5, bring all tier 5 weapons. It's better for you and your enemies. Well, mostly for you, to be exact. You can see what BR you are at, well, what BR you're going to be fighting in, at the top of your screen. It will tell you generally what BR you will be at, and in order to change some weapons that you don't want for the specific BR, just go in and check what individual soldiers you have that does not have the weapon that you want. Should I say, the weapon that is the outlier for that specific BR. What I'm trying to say is that if you're going to tier 1, do not bring a tier 5 FG42. That is just death, because you're going to be fighting tier 5s. That said, let's move on to number 2. Contradictory to what I said in number 1. In number 2, we have all weapons kill. Now, the last tip has me explaining in why you should bring weapons of one tier, instead of all different tiers mashed together. In this tip, I'm just gonna state that all weapons get kills. I'm not just talking about bolt action rifles at tier 5 can get you kills, but I'm saying that some tiers some weapons such as the weapons in tier 1 and tier 2 are very good at tiers 3 or even tiers 2. What I'm trying to say, or should I give you an example of, is that of the IAR. This Romanian tier 1 fighter is really good at almost everything. Dogfighting, bomb load, that's also very good. This is an example of what you could potentially bring for higher tiers, such as tiers 2, tiers 3, and in some cases I've seen players bring it in tier 5 and use it very successfully. Now, do I actually suggest that you do this for all the weapons? Hell no, because that's going to lead to death, or a very miserable experience. Once again, if you have an outlier, take it out. All your setups as new players or as veteran players should now be most of the weapons in the exact same tier. So that's that. That said, let's move on to number 3. And speaking of number 3, my suggestion is to avoid tier 3. Now, Enlisted is currently in a structure in which tiers 1s and 2s are matched against each other, and tiers 4s and 5 are in another category. The issue with tier 3 is that tiers 3 can fight against 1s, 2s, or 4s and 5s. Literally, tier 3 has the ability to up tier and down tier. Thence, that is why a lot of people hate tiers 3. So that's going to be an issue, because tiers 3, if you get a lucky match, which is almost never in Enlisted, you fight against down tiers, which your weapons, hopefully at that tier, is really good. And in most of the cases, which is 99% of the time, you will get up tier, which means that you will be fighting weapons from tier 5 or tier 4. So that's that. Nevertheless, avoid tiers 3. That said, let's move on to tip number 4, and that is to play tiers 2 or tiers 5. Now, tiers 2 is really good for early war equipment, and that is weapons like the Springfield and etc. And tiers 5 is the only tier that you should be playing for the late game, unless, of course, you're grinding the entire tech tree, which is an exception. But overall, tiers 2 and tiers 5 are very good exceptions to the rule, in the sense that the tiers 2s and tier 5s are some of the best tiers to play, not only in terms of balancing, for you, to be exact, but also in terms of weapons, so that's very interesting. Once again, I highly suggest that you play tier 1 if you have to grind, avoid tier 3 and avoid tier 4 and just go to tier 5. Of course, you should ignore what I'm saying if you're grinding. If you're grinding, just grind the entire tech tree. That said, let's move on to players and popular factions. So Enlisted right now, there are a lot of factions. However, most of the player base only tends to play a few. For example, and currently, most notoriously, Germany. Thus, a lot of players are playing as Germany, and there is going to be a massive disadvantage for anyone who is not playing Germany. For example, if you play as the Soviets, you're going to tend to have a bad game because most of the good players and most of the players are going to be on Germany. You either have 0 to no players or are mostly filled with bots. One good way to find whether it is the meta faction or what faction that most players play is to join random battles. Whatever faction you get, you know that it is not the faction that a lot of players are playing. And as of right now, for those who are wondering, it is currently the United States and the Soviet Union. That said, let's move on to tip number 6, and that is how to tell the difference between bots and humans. So for starters, bots have name tags, so the name tags in which you see the little dots or something on the side of your name. Bots, on the other hand, don't. Players will join battles earlier than bots do, and you can tell by pressing the tab button on your PC to see whether or when players join. Bots usually join the battle during the last 5 to 10 seconds, or in some cases 3 seconds of the battle. Usually players join around the 20-second mark or 10-second mark. I have yet to see a bot join at 20 seconds, so that is a very good way to tell whether they're players or bots. Also, a very big giveaway is that players usually use tanks and planes, and bots cannot use them. So if you see a tank or a plane, that is definitely a human. And you can visually tell the difference between players and bots by how they move. It is kind of very obvious once you can tell whether they move. Bots tend to be more clunkier and humans tend to be running faster, or attempting to run at the fastest rate. That said, let's move on to tip number 7, and that is hip-firing. Aiming weapons can take time away from killing. Most skilled players in Enlisted use hip-fire, meaning firing without aiming. This is usually done at short ranges, and it is very useful at clearing buildings, or essentially firing on the move. Essentially, this does take skill because it requires you to know the game and it requires you to know how to hip fire, and it is really useful on weapons on sites that you either hate or, once again, like I said, hip firing or taking out units at close range. Overall, it does take a lot of practice since hip firing does guarantee less accuracy when you're hip firing, and you don't see the aiming button, so that's going to be a problem. But that said, let's move on to tip number 8. At tip number 8, we have flamethrowers. One of the best weapons in Enlisted is the flamethrower. It can burn through cracks of a building, it can set the ground on fire, and once you walk on the ground you will burn, and also flamethrowers demoralize troops by essentially burning them alive, so that's going to be a problem. And it also carries massive sway and eventually leads to death once you burn a person. However, soldiers who use flamethrowers can be killed by soldiers who are not fully burned. What I mean by that is that if a soldier attempts to burn you, there is a few 1 or 2 seconds before you fully burn that you can just shoot the person to death who is using the flamethrower. I have done it multiple times in which a flamethrower tried to burn me, but before he can burn me fully, I shoot him, and then, well, he's dead. So that's that. What I mean for the flamethrower to counter this is that to flank your enemies. Flanking your enemies and attacking your enemies. This can also be done by the enemy who is trying to kill flamethrowers by flanking the flamethrowers and shooting them. Essentially, flamethrowers should attack in a place in which enemies don't expect, and the players who want to kill flamethrowers should also do that too, to kill flamethrowers. So that's that. Tip number 8 for flamethrowers and anti-flamethrowers is to flank. At tip number 9, we have rockets. On some planes, you have the ability to use rockets. These include the Americans, and some of the Soviets, and some of the Germans. Hence, one of the things that most people don't seem to understand is that rockets, like bombs, can take out both infantry and tanks, most notably the tanks. You have to be accurate with your rockets though. Unlike bombs, rockets do require a direct hit on tanks, whereas bombs, if you know where to aim, and if you don't know where to aim, can land around the tank and boom goes the tank. Rockets, on the other hand, require you to directly hit the tank, or should I say the object. On some planes such as the P-47, I do suggest that you aim your rockets a little bit to the side to get a direct hit on the tanks. Rockets, unlike bombs, are also really good for taking out infantry since they do have a massive splash damage and they can clear points really easy if said point is on the open. So that's that. At number 10 we have gray zone camping. For those who don't know, there is a thing called gray zone camping, or a place in which players cannot go into. You can see where your gray zone is by looking at the map, and you can see it via the gray spot on the map, hence that is why it's called gray zone camping. Thus, some players exploit this by parking their tanks, mostly their heavy tanks, with good guns and blasting people away at the gray zone. What is worse is that players with weapons such as anti-tank weapons that can destroy them are not able to because they're so far away. This is once again effectively called gray zone camping. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can deal with them, and here are some of the following. For one, mark the gray zone campers. If you do not have a weapon, or if your weapon does not reach the enemy tank, I highly suggest that you mark the enemy tank and then leave it to your teammates to take them out. This would usually result in your friendly tanks or planes taking them out. So that's that. That is how you deal with gray zone camping. And let's move on to number 11. Weapons and vehicle stats. When in Enlisted Hangar, one of the best things to look at is the vehicle stats, or the weapon stats. And there are a lot to look at. Of course, Enlisted has a lot of stats, but some of my favorite to look at for weapons are recoil and hit power, and some of my favorite to look at for tanks is the armor, the gun, and the speed. And for planes, it of course is how many bombs they carry or how many weapons they carry, and the flight dynamics themselves. So that's that. And finally, we have number 12. This is one of the best tips I can offer to veteran players because this is to ask you to read the kill feed. You can tell what enemies there are if you read the kill feed. For example, if you see someone on the enemy team getting a kill with a 75mm KWK-42 cannon, you know it is Panther. If you see someone on the enemy team get a 75mm KWK-40L-43 cannon kill, then you definitely know it's a Panzer IV F2. Essentially, know your enemy equipment and read the kill feed. That you can instantly tell what your enemies have. Of course, if your enemy has an 88mm, you either know that is a Tiger 2H, Tiger 2P, or a Tiger 1. So that's that. To recap, reading the kill feed allows you to tell what weapons or vehicles your enemy have before you even see them, and you can counter that however you want. But that said, let's move on to number 13, and that is upgrading weapons. Yes, in Enlisted you can upgrade your weapons, but it does cost money, but it is definitely worth it. However, there are some caveats before you ask whether or not you should upgrade said weapon. Number 1, is the weapon worth to be upgraded? Number 2 is what tiered weapon is worth it to be upgraded. For example, if you're going to bring the MP40 to tiers 2 or tiers 3, I actually suggest that you upgrade it. Do not upgrade weapons like the OVP or the M1918. They're just not worth it. Are you going to be using that weapon often? For example, are you going to be using the MP40 often at tiers 2? And if the answer is yes, highly suggest that you upgrade. As of right now, some weapons I highly suggest that you upgrade are the MP40 as suggested, the PPS-43, the PPS-42, and the Type 100 SMG. So that's that. That said, let's move on to number 14, and that is controlling your AI. In Enlisted, you can control your AI, which is one of the most interesting things. Although you can command them to do a lot of things, there are some basic things that you can tell them to do, and that is to hide. For example, you can order your soldiers to move to a specific spot by pressing the X button. This will essentially allow you to move to said specific spot for your squad, and they will stay there unless you move far away. This usually has some benefits. For some players I know, they use their X button to order their AI soldiers to attack with them on a point. Well, veteran players usually ask their AIs to stay away from the fight as far away as possible so they can personally get more kills in and out, which is actually much better because AI are notorious for getting kills. And speaking of AIs getting kills, let's move on to number 15. AIs love fully automatic weapons. For some reason in Enlisted right now, AIs respond really well to getting kills with a fully automatic weapon. These include weapons such as machine guns, submachine guns, and fully automatic rifles such as the M2 carbine. This is really good for AI bots because for some reason they get a lot of kills, and you can actually get kills with your AIs, especially if they're in close quarters combat. What I mean by this is that AIs are notorious for getting close range kills, whether melee or essentially no-scoping your enemies. Essentially this could be done, or you can essentially be done, by essentially engaging your enemies, or having your AIs engage your enemies in close quarters combat. For example, if you're turning around the corner and your AIs are there, they can just melee the person who just turned around the corner. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that AIs are really good in that specific situation, which actually happens more than you think. On the other hand, as a player, I highly do suggest that you be careful of this, since this could lead to your death if you just turn the corner and an AI bot is there. You are actually able to get killed before you shoot a weapon because the AI can just melee you. So that is something to watch out. And overall, AIs in general are very good at essentially no-scoping you from range. So that is something also to avoid. So that's that. Overall, I do suggest that you be careful with AIs. Shoot them before they have the chance to shoot you, so that's that. With that said, have a great day guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord. What tip do you think was helpful? And I'll see you in the next one.